Now, what I was telling Brandon and I were just talking about the fact that that's her co-fellow, Gary Wortman, there in the picture with her. Hold on, let me see if I can get it to. I got to go back like that. Sorry. Okay, so this is Brandon and her co-fellow, and I was just saying that I told them the same thing, which is when you start practice, I think this is the time where really the work-life balance needs to be on work. I think you need to, those first 3 to 5 years, really build your practice. The old saying, if you need to be available, affable, and able, I think really still holds true. But then when you sort of hit mid-career, at this point, your practice is built and your career tends to be on kind of autopilot. So I think this is the reevaluation period. And then late in your career is when you need to start thinking about transitions. How are you preparing your junior partners to be successful in their careers? Have you secured your own retirement plan? So all of our needs are constantly changing, which just speaks to the fact that that balance is really dynamic and it's not static. And then your part, in terms of your family, they've obviously got needs as well. And your partner is the most important person in your life. And sadly, they tend to be the one that gets sacrificed when there is the need to add on something else or do one more commitment. That time inevitably gets taken from them. And the other people that we tend to unfortunately hurt and that suffer with it when we get ourselves out of balance tends to be our children. And particularly post-COVID, kids need in-person times with their parents. It's the highest ever rate of childhood depression and suicidal ideations. And our kids live in a virtual world. They've got virtual devices, they've done virtual school, they've done virtual church, and they really don't need a virtual family. They need you there in person. And one of the stinging lines I was told at one point in the past is, what does the child of a doctor grow up wanting to be? And the answer is a patient, so they can actually spend time with their parent and be cared for by them. So I certainly try hard not to let them be left out of that equation and to give them the time that they obviously deserve. So Aristotle said way back when, obviously, that life is an interplay of love, work, worship, and play. And it's incredible that in today's world, I think Aristotle's probably still spot on, as I personally still find myself trying to balance my family or my love, my work, which includes both patient care and career development, my personal faith, and then my time for myself, which is the playtime. So I think he was pretty accurate back then. And Thomas More, in his book Soulmates, said that balance is a perfectionist's idea, never to be found in actual life. I don't necessarily agree with him. I think you can find balance, but in my personal experience, at least, what happens is you can find it, but you can't maintain it without absolutely constantly attending to it. And, you know, we're all busy. And I was thinking about it when I was putting this talk together of my time in Atlanta, and there's Cobb County rush hour, which is neither a rush nor is it an hour. And everything's busy. We're being pulled in a million directions. And the one thing I would say is it seems like the things that matter the least seem to pull the hardest. And the things that matter the most tend to love you and just sit idle and wait their turn. So we're getting constant email reminders and this, that, for all these little petty things we have to get done. But your family just sits there and they wait their turn for you. So this is a true story. It was about halfway through my fellowship. I was working about 100 hours a week, writing about a research paper every week and on way too many committees. And my wife, she told me that she loved me, but she was going to move to Charlotte. I was in Indianapolis, as Brandy said, and this was in about February, and we had 2 boys. And she was like, look, this is a city that I don't know anybody and I never see you. And she wasn't mean about it, and she wasn't vindictive about it. And she just said that she loved me. And right now she wanted me to devote myself to becoming the best doctor I could possibly be. And she said, when you get back to Charlotte, I want you to be the most prepared you can be. And right now we're not helping you to do that. And when you get here, then spend the time with us that we need. And so she literally moved to Charlotte in February of the year. And I went to my mentor, Bill Kleiman, and said, you know, how would you handle this? And he just said, Glenn, your pie is only so large. You can slice it how you want to. And my response to Bill was, that's true, but if I'm more efficient than anybody else, then I could put more toppings on my pie. So my solution was going to be that my pie could still be bigger. It could just go tall wide with more toppings. And this concept is really nothing new. Dr. Richard Swinson described the concept of margin back in the day, and he defined margin as a space between our load and our limit. And he said the problem is when life activities exceed that margin, then it has to take away from other areas. And all of us are type A individuals, and we tend to run our lives with little to no margin in any of these areas. So we naturally have an innate strong tendency to negatively affect the other areas when our life falls out of balance, because we don't have much margin. We're kind of pushed to the max on every one of these. So as soon as one gets a little out of whack, it throws it all off. And Dr. Swinson went on to say a lack of margin will have our wallets get fatter, our houses get bigger, our cars get faster, and our brains get smarter. Yet when we neglect the most important priorities, our reward fittingly will be all the unhappiness that money can buy. And I think that's very true, because as I said earlier, I think left alone, the margin that we're going to pursue is work. I mean, that's just who we are as individuals. So how do we do it? How do we actually find balance? And this is the hard part of the talk. It's easy to talk about what it is and what we want to attain, but how do you actually find it? And again, I think this really has to be individualized. And I'm a morning person. And when I finished my fellowship, I was very used to 4 or 4:30 o'clock a.m. alarms. So my first 5 years in practice, I was up at 5 a.m. and I was in the office at 5:45 in the morning. And early in my career, this was my time. This was when I dictated, I'd pre-read for office and surgeries, I did my research, I'd write letters to referring doctors, put together PowerPoints, and everyone's got their own way of doing this, though. Other people that I think are very good at balance do the exact opposite. They may do breakfast with their family and take their kids to school and then come to the office, and then they stay later and do their other work things at that time. But this was what worked for me. I think one notable thing you'll see in quote my time is a significant absence of time for me to exercise and time for me to play. So those just did not exist my first probably 5 years in practice. But then on the flip side, 5:15 p.m. to 9 p.m. was family time. And unless I was on call, this didn't get disrupted. And we had family dinners at the table, and I bathed the kids and read them bedtime stories and put them to bed, and then would give my wife a foot massage and watch TV with her until 9 o'clock at night. And we added to that the monthly date night. For those of you who are just starting practice, I think, especially when families get introduced, as I said earlier, the spouse tends to be the person that gets left out. And so we actually would just put on the schedule for the whole year. We'd have our monthly date night planned and the babysitter hired for a full year in advance. And that way I knew at least once a month we'd have our time together. And then for my daughter, one thing that worked very well for me that I still do with her, she's a rising 7th grader, is we have our annual father-daughter date night where I get dressed up in a shirt and tie and bring flowers and ring the doorbell and pick her up. And the one advantage of that is when they do start dating, then that's what they associate with the way it should be. So anybody that does anything less than that is not hopefully going to be an appropriate suitor in her eyes. But then a little bit later in my quote early career, we start running out of time, and then 9 to 11 or 12 or sometimes 3 in the morning becomes that overflow work time. Now that's where more research, more PowerPoints, and I certainly ascribe to the I can sleep when I'm dead theory. But by mid-career, clearly I was overwhelmed. My pie was too small for my own personal demands. Professionally, I was proud of it. I was the chief of hand surgery. I was starting a fellowship, speaking every few weeks at a national meeting. I had piles of manuscripts I was writing and I was covering every single pro team we had in Charlotte. But the problem was the rest of life. I had no personal time, and my kids are no longer, at this point, they're not just diaper changes and bedtime stories. Now they got sporting events and school plays and recitals and things that are actually happening during the day, as opposed to 5:15 to 9 p.m., which I had set aside for them. And besides that one date night, there was absolutely no time to spend with my wife. And there were 3 things that I think really helped me get through that transition of early career to mid-career when I was very out of balance. One was a lecture by Jack Flynn. One was a dinner with Andy Palmer, one of the past presidents of the Ham Society. And then one was just actually getting to spend more time and talk to my wife about it, who's much wiser than me at balance. She's the one that should actually be giving this talk and not me. But Jack Flynn gave us a grand round talk. If you haven't heard Jack talk, you can find it on YouTube a lot of times for his talks. And he spoke about peak performance for surgeons. He introduced two things that really resonated with me. One was the concept of a deep dive day, and one was the concept of the surgeon athlete. The deep dive day, Jack said, this is something he did once a month. He took completely off and signed out of the office. And for me now, it's the second Monday of every month I'm signed out and I have nothing scheduled. And I wake up and I work out, and then I have 8 to 12 hours that are completely my time. And this can range. There's months where this is like email purge, administrative work. There's other times I've got a big paper or a chapter that's due. I put PowerPoints like this one together. And there's other times I go fishing, or I take my wife and we go on a hike. And it's what this did is it freed up those early mornings and those late nights, which were clearly no longer adequate to meet my personal career demands. And now that time can go back to family and other things where it belongs. And I will tell you, taking one day a month is going to have absolutely no impact on the money you bring home, because what it actually did is it made me much more efficient when I was there, because I didn't feel like I had all these other burdens just hanging over me. One of the things Dr. Flynn said is, which is really true. He said, Glenn, you can't be a thought leader if you don't make time to think. And this is my time to think. And we need time like that, because you can't get a lot of these things done in bite-sized time bits that we typically try to live within, which are like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. He also introduced to me the concept of the surgeon athlete. And he said that our job is physically, mentally, and emotionally draining. And he brilliantly illustrated the fact that we spend our entire lives on this hedonic treadmill, that we're always in pursuit of the next accomplishment. We want to get into the best college, and the best med school, and the best residency, then the best fellowship. Then we want to get high up in our professional societies and have academic titles. And we're always chasing those things in our profession, but we don't have those same goals in the other three domains that Aristotle mentioned. And he said that he said we should really look at each day that we go to work like we're heading into a World Cup match. Those athletes are well rested, and they've spent a lot of time to exercise and clear their own minds. And we simply typically don't do the same things for ourselves. And so this prompted me to really reevaluate things. And now I get home, and it's not long. I spend 20 minutes, and that's my little workout time, and a little bit more time in the morning to clear my mind and think of things. And so finding your own balance for this is important, but I think having the concept is critical. Andy Palmer was the Hand Society president in 1998, and he gave his presidential address on balance. And I actually was there, and I was a second-year medical student interested in hand surgery even back then. But the talk clearly did not apply to me. But then in 2016, Andy and I were doing a research project together, and my career had progressed honestly more rapidly than I anticipated. And he came here, and I remember asking him, I said, I remember when you gave that talk on balance, it wasn't very relevant then. And we spent probably 3 or 4 hours having dinner and drinks and talking about it. And he really helped teach me a lot about balance. And a lot of some of the pearls I'm giving you in fairness are pearls of Andy's that he passed on to me. And as I mentioned, lastly, my wife, I would say that certainly the first half of my career, at least 75% of our arguments that occurred about twice a year revolved around me being out of balance. And somehow she always knew the right balance, and she had a knack for pointing me in the right direction. Like when I told her I was going to chair our national meeting a few years ago, she said, that sounds good. So what are you going to drop to make time for that? And of course I stood there like, I'm going to, and I had no idea. And then, but it made me realize, like, you know what, that's right. How am I going to fit in 100 hours this year, the time I already don't have? But I sat down and looked at different committees and things I was on, and realized that a lot of these committees and reviewers and tasks that I had been doing, I didn't have to do at this stage of my career. And you're not just saying no. What I was able to do is find my junior partners and give them those roles, let them be reviewers, let them be on these committees. So it's really a win-win. You're building their career development, but you're prioritizing your own. And this led me to do some different things, like my Wednesday half days, which I'm going to talk to you about coming up in a minute. This became an opportunity. I took Wednesdays, and I took only work a half day down on Wednesday. And Wednesdays I do lunch with my wife, and that's my personal time as well. And she reminded me our boys were going to college in 3 years. We need to increase family vacations. And it's this mid-career stage where all of a sudden everything kind of starts to change. kids' activities that, they don't even get home half the time till after dinner. And so the families just gets thrown way out of balance. And so this was a stage in life where I realized that I had to become more efficient. Even though I felt like I was efficient, my practice was slammed, professional career was seemingly at an all-time high, and family needed more attention. But again, my pie was only so big. So as Tim Ferriss said, this is when it was time to focus on being productive instead of busy. I had taken on a lot of roles and I was doing a little for a lot of different things. And now it was time to really put a lot into a smaller number of things. And Mother Teresa said that very, very eloquently. She said, the test of your life is not how much you do, but the passion with which you do it. So I had to figure out how to be more efficient and get more toppings on my pie without compromising my own margin. So here's kind of the things that I then did is trying to become more efficient. I think when I'm speaking about efficiency, I think of tangible and intangible efficiency. And when I'm speaking of tangible efficiency, I mean those things that literally result in a concrete amount of time that you gain, like either finding lost time or creating new time, which I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. But far more important, I think, honestly, is the intangible efficiency that gains immeasurable amounts of time by you leading a team effort with your staff and with your patients. And that's really, I think, where the hidden efficiency lies. So the tangible efficiencies are there, and some people are naturally good at using it and some aren't, but there's a lot of small time in our days that we waste. For the surgeons in the group, we've got time between cases, and this can range from 15 minutes to almost an hour, sadly, at our institution sometimes. But and then you've got times between office sessions. We got morning and afternoon sessions, and let's be honest, none of us need an hour to eat lunch, but our schedules are set up that way. So there's a lot of time there. And if you spend that time dictating or doing work emails instead of social media or other standard distractions, then suddenly at the end of the day, there is more time for family and there's less work that you're actually taking home. Another few things I do as a surgeon, I put all of my self-pay patients that are uninsured or my unhealthy patients as the last case of the day, because they're the most likely to get canceled. And if they get canceled, it's the last case of the day. Now I've got a lot of fine time at an appropriate time of day where I can do things with it. I can go work out, I can go be with my family, or I can dictate. Versus if it's the middle of the day and you get this random block from 10:30 to 10:45 or whatever, it's not as helpful. Another thing, one of my colleagues, Bob Anderson, a foot and ankle surgeon, told me, when you hit this phase of your career, is I hold 2 slots at the beginning of my day and 2 slots at the end of the day that only I can book. And these are VIP slots, which in my practice can be pro athletes or can just be friends of people I know. And that's huge for a few reasons. Then when the random person calls you or the person that you really know and says, hey, is there any way you can work in my dad anytime soon? You just put them on in the VIP slot and it's already there. And if no one shows up, that's found time. Again, that's tangible efficiency if those slots aren't used. And if you need them, then you're not overbooking your day for the next day and pushing further into your margin. Other tangible efficiencies, EMR macros. And I'll be the first to admit, I hate the entire concept of templated notes. But that simply is the world we're in now. And quote, insert tennis elbow saves me about 30 seconds every time, which is probably hours over the course of my career. So that's one easy one. And then workflow is key. And establishing an optimal workflow with you and your nurse is absolutely critical, because each visit, in my opinion, should be you enter that patient's room and you exit that patient's room one time. If you're having to go in and out of the room because, you need to order x-rays or you didn't have the labs or you need a nerve study, these are time crushers, because basically then the second time in with that patient, it's like you're seeing 2 patients, but you're only getting credit for seeing 1. And then lastly, one of the things I tell my residents and fellows is every note should end with what Bill Kleiman told me, which is, quote, if this, then that, and if that, then this. And an example would be, no note should end with follow-up in 2 weeks, because that's just not a plan. If it is more like, quote, if they show signs of healing on the x-ray, then I'm going to transition to a brace. But if not, then I'll cast them for another 2 weeks. When they come back, it's really easy. Is there signs of healing? Yes or no? And I know my plan. The other thing it avoids you doing is contradicting yourself. There's nothing worse than when that patient says, well, last time you said that if this happened, you were going to do a cortisone shot. And you're like, oh, well, we could do that. Is that what I said? My bad. So you avoid contradicting yourself, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you have a follow-up visit. So as I mentioned, Jack Flynn introduced that concept of a surgeon athlete, but I would take it one step further in this context, because we're really not individuals in our practice, but rather we are the leader of a healthcare team. And your efficiency is only going to be as good as the weakest link in that team. So there will be a rate limiting step. And no matter how efficient you are as an individual, you can't be more efficient if one or more members of your team lack efficiency. And so it's really your role to teach and lead them. Because even Darwin said that about teams' ability to outperform individuals when he said it's the long history of mankind that those who learn to collaborate and improvise will most effectively prevail. And it's absolutely true. So I told you about my teams. I've got my family team that I have to please when I get home, and I've got my work team that I have to please when I'm at work. And one thing I realized is I was doing a terrible job, because this was an either or when I was in practice. But I realized that this needs to be one team, because both of these teams need to know that you love them, you care about them, and then they're going to work harder for you. Let's face it, people, you don't work hard for someone that you don't care about. And so for me, integrating these two teams is something that I realized about mid-career would really make my life easier. And so I found ways to commingle them. My wife and my kids come to the office about every 3 or 4 months and bring stuff to the whole office team. Valentine's Day, they bring cookies, or Halloween treats with like little arm lollipops in our case, and Christmas cards for the whole staff. And then my staff knows my family. And we have social outings where we'll all get together. We go to some of the local minor league baseball games and get the whole outfield rented out, and we'll spend time together. And we have a charity event that we call Arms for All. But when your home team and your office team get to know each other, then they get to care about each other. And then your office staff wants you to get home in time to spend time with your family, because they know them. And your family understands more when your office time needs time as well. So you need to be the leader of this team. And for my work team, and everyone has their own ways that they do it. But for me, at the end of each year, I write every member of my office team a personal letter. And I remind them of how much they mean to me, and how much they mean to our patients, and how much I appreciate all that they do for me. And I personally think it's key. And then there's other ways, like my boys that take their pickup trucks and fill it up with dirt to go help my nurse do her lawn landscaping. And my daughter, every time she's at the office dictating with me on the weekends, she'll write notes and drawings and tape them on their office walls. And I think because of that, my office team really does work tirelessly to make me more efficient. And as I said, I don't care how hard you work in your office. You can only go as fast as the team that's helping you. And if it's all flashing red lights on your little light scheme, meaning it's up to your nurse, then you're not being helped enough. So I think that's one of the key things. Some other ingredients that I think are critical is there can't be any task below you. I think you earn the respect of your staff by being a team player. If you're someone who just sits in your module on your high chair waiting for them to do everything, you're not going to earn their respect. And I'm not afraid in our OR and in my office to grab the mop and help clean up and do my job. And I think they see that and they respect that, and they want to work even harder for you, and be the one that coordinates team outings and outreach missions together. That really brings teams together. And I'll give you another illustrative personal story of my pathetic ability to initially, early in my career, merge these two. Was the fact that I had two calendars. I had my work calendar and I had my home calendar. And this was a serious personal deficit of my own, because I remember very well the classic. My wife and I are laying in bed one night. It was about 9 o'clock at night. And she goes, don't forget that tomorrow's father-daughter coffee at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, I told you like 6 months ago or something. I was like, I didn't have that on my schedule. And of course, I got surgery starting at like 7 a.m. So now it's the classic, like, now what are you going to do? You going to cancel surgery? Are you going to stand up your daughter? What's more important? How are you going to handle this? And it made me realize, why do I have two separate calendars? So now they're merged. And so now I have my wife, every single time she plans something for our family, she emails my nurse, my admin assistant, my surgery scheduler, and that goes on the schedule. And I can't tell you how many times I'll tell my scheduler, like, hey, we've only got surgery scheduled at 3 next Thursday. I think go ahead and add on this extra flexor tendon. She's like, Dr. G, that's your daughter's play. you got to be there at 3:30. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Thank you. So having those two schedules merged for me is huge. So another thing about how to get more efficient is when I started out, I was seeing about 20 patients per session. And one thing I would ask you to think about is, say you work an office that you work 5 days a week. So you're working 10 sessions. If you're seeing 20 people per session, that means I'm seeing 200 patients per week. If you just add 2 people per session and then you drop an entire half day, then you're seeing 198 patients per week, and you just gain an entire half day to do whatever you want to with it. So it's really amazing how much small additions to our schedule can dramatically drive productivity. And you can use that productivity in a lot of ways. You can either use it for life or you can use it for work. And if you do this gradually, your team by default will get more and more and more efficient. And so that's what I did. I started at 20 and I'd added 2 patients per half day. And I waited about 6 to 8 weeks. And then it got to where we were finishing on time again. And I'd add another 2 patients. And then a couple months in, we'd be running on time again. And I had another 2 patients. And so now, after years of doing that, I can very routinely see 75 to 80 patients a day with my team. And it wasn't like this massive change for them. This was a gradual thing that took place. So I'd encourage you, if you want to try to find some time, consider just adding 1 more patient per half day, and or start 15 minutes earlier, or whatever your schedule, whatever works for you, but find a way. And I would rather get there and be really busy when I'm there, but have that result in me having more free time. So that's what gave me that half day. That gave me that Wednesday afternoon. That gave me the Wednesday lunch with the wife and time to work out, things that I like to do and give me more personal time. So find your own way, but I think that's key. And then the other intangible is gaining the trust of your patients. And I would say that hand surgery, to me, is one of the most beautiful fields of all of medicine. And I get the pleasure not just of working on such an elegant part of the human anatomy, but the person attached to that hand. And I think you have to find in your own way how you convey your empathy for your patients and your love to your patients very effectively, because that connection makes everything work, and it makes surgical decisions simple, as opposed to these long drawn out. If they trust you, then they basically just say, what do you think I should do? And you tell them, and it saves a ton of time on the back end. If my mom comes to me and says she has a trigger finger, I just say, Mom, you need a cortisone injection. She doesn't even question me, and I do it, and she's better. The same thing needs to happen with patients. And once you get that level of, once patients know that you care about them and they trust you, number one, it's more obvious pleasure in just your relationship with them, but it really improves your efficiency to a level that's off the charts, because you don't need to spend as much time with them because you've already set the groundwork. And for me, one of the trickiest patient populations I have to do that with is my pro athletes, because a lot of them are really skeptical that I'm having the team's best interest at heart rather than their own best interest. And so even with them, I have to find my own personal way to really connect. And that's how I get to do photos like you see there with me dabbing with one of our Panthers players after his surgery, because he wanted a selfie to be able to post with me, because we'd actually really connected. And I have to say, some people are just more innately gifted at this and the ability to communicate and connect to patients rapidly and achieve this mutuality, while for others, it's a more difficult step. But few are more gifted than Paul Brand, who was a hand surgeon who wrote a book you see here called The Gift of Pain. And he wrote that after he quit his practice to volunteer for a leper community in the final several years of his practice. And he said, when we've shared not only our knowledge and skill, but a part of ourselves with our patients, when we see something, when we see something of hope and faith awaken in them, then something comes back to us. It is in the mutuality of medical care that we experience real joy. I think he's absolutely true. And here's some of my pearls for gaining my patients' trust. One, and I wish we were in person to do this, but his eyes below theirs. If you're in a room with other people, just go sit next to somebody and sit about your eyes a few inches below theirs, and then get eye level, and then get a few inches above them. And I think what you'll see is, as you get higher and your eyes get above theirs, there's a very, very uncomfortable feeling when you're the person on the other side. So this is huge for me, because I have a lot of these orthopedists that come rotate with me that are like, 6'5", 280, and they're just these giant guys. I tell them, I don't care if you sit on the floor, but your eyes have got to be below that of your patients. So I think that's a key one. I think another one is touch. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard patients say, the last doctor never even laid hands on me. And obviously we have to do that for a physical exam, but I think an appropriate form of touch, which is something I try to do with every patient. And as I leave the room, it may be a pat on the knee, a pat on the shoulder, or in our case, a lot of times it's just a big old bear hug with patients. And but I think you have to find your own way for appropriate touch, but I think that's key. Another one is everyone gets something. It's one of my rules. When patients leave the office and you hand them nothing tangible, a lot of them feel like they got nothing out of the visit. So it can be buddy tape, it can be a handout with instructions for a home exercise program, but find something you can give them and they'll feel like they really got something out of that visit. Another one's the fun fact. So every one of my patients, I find a fun fact about them, and it can be that they're a Cubs fan, they have a grandbaby named Sarah, whatever it is. Find something and then put it in the note. And when they come back, bring it up as the first thing. Just say, by the way, how's that grandbaby, Sarah? How about them Cubbies this year? And they instantly feel connected. They feel like you really remembered something personal about them. And then I share something similar about it with them. So if they're a Cubs fan, I tell them that I'm a Braves fan, or that I've got 3 kids and I don't have any grandkids. And then they know something about you and you know something about them. And that's kind of one of those connectors. And the last one, something that's probably a little more controversial for some people, but I will tell you, at least in my own practice, I do pray for all my patients every night. And whenever they're having a hard time, either with a negative outcome or just a tough point in life, I tell my patients that I'll keep them and their family in my prayers. And at least here, that really goes a long way at gaining patients' trust. So I think these interactions with our patients are really meaningful, and they have to know you care for them. And once they do, then every subsequent visit can be quicker and it's more efficient because you're not, again, having to spend as much time with things because they trust you implicitly. What do you think I should do? This is what I think you should do. Good. We do it, we move on. So complications are easier tolerated and understood by patients. And I think in general, the highs are higher and the lows aren't as low. So in summary, I think we just need to recognize the need for balance in our lives. We need to recognize that this balance is dynamic and it's individualistic. And then I think you can maximize efficiency in your office, which hopefully will allow you more time to free up for the things that you really do love. I'd like to close with a long but really elegant quote of Dr. Paul Brands, who said, a special source of happiness in hand surgery is the interaction between me as a person and the person of my patient. The hand, more than any other organ except the brain itself, is symbolic of the mind and the soul of a person. It represents his life, his work, his strength, and his love. One touch of a hand may mean more than 1,000 words. The quality of the touch of my hand may mean more to a patient than the assurance of my voice or even the content of what I say. Touch is mutual. It's the seal of the oneness of the sick person and the healer. It's a statement that my thought and understanding, my sympathy and my faith have gone into the diagnosis and will now carry us forward together throughout the treatment. As a person, I stand behind my judgment, and with my hands, I demonstrate that I am there to serve the person whose life is now somewhat linked to mine. So I think it's really true. And I think that, again, it helps efficiency. It helps the joy of your practice. And I certainly thank you for the opportunity to give the talk, and thank all the patients that I get the absolute pleasure of taking care of on a daily basis. So thanks for having me, and I'm happy to field any questions.